He laughed, because he thought he had already seen everything. The receipt slipped from Clara Whitmore's hand and landed softly on the polished marble floor, unnoticed by anyone except her. She bent down, slow and deliberate, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper as the low hum of expensive conversations filled the restaurant, crystal glasses clinking, quiet deals being made in voices that never needed to rise. And when she picked it up, her eyes didn't just scan it, they paused, just for a second longer than normal, as if something invisible had caught her attention, something small, something quiet, something wrong. But across the room, Ethan Caldwell was laughing, the kind of effortless, controlled laugh that came from a man who had built his life on certainty, on numbers that always aligned, on decisions that never needed a second guess. His tailored suit sharp against the soft lighting, his watch catching a brief reflection as he leaned back in his chair, surrounded by men who nodded at everything he said, because men like Ethan were rarely questioned, not in boardrooms, not in restaurants, not anywhere, and certainly not by someone like her, just a waitress in a simple black uniform, moving silently between tables, carrying plates, refilling glasses, invisible unless needed. And yet Clara didn't move right away. She stood there for a moment, the receipt still in her hand, her gaze distant, not unfocused, but calculating, like she was rearranging something in her mind that didn't quite fit. The number repeated itself, subtle, easy to miss, almost designed to be overlooked, and maybe that's why it stayed with her, because she was used to things being overlooked, used to people assuming she saw nothing, knew nothing, understood nothing beyond the next order, and maybe that was why she noticed, because no one ever expected her to. Across the room, Ethan's voice cut through again, confident, precise, discussing figures that most people in the restaurant couldn't even comprehend, millions moving like casual suggestions, percentages spoken like certainties, and the men around him leaned in, listening, agreeing, reinforcing the quiet authority he carried so effortlessly. Clara stepped forward then, her movements smooth, controlled, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if she hadn't just seen something that didn't belong. She placed a glass of water on the table, the condensation leaving a faint ring on the surface, her hand steady, her expression neutral, and for a moment she hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awareness, because she understood exactly what it meant to interrupt a man like Ethan Caldwell. She understood the invisible line she was about to cross, the one that separated service from significance, silence from consequence. And still, she spoke, her voice soft, almost blending into the background noise. "Sir, I think this number appears twice." And for half a second, nothing happened, no reaction, no shift, just the continuation of conversation as if her words hadn't even registered. And then Ethan looked up, slowly, his expression unchanged, his eyes meeting hers with mild curiosity, the kind reserved for minor interruptions. And then he smiled, not warmly, not kindly, but with quiet amusement, as if the situation itself entertained him, as if her presence in that moment was unexpected, even slightly absurd. He glanced down at the document, barely, not really checking, just acknowledging, and then he let out a soft laugh, the kind that didn't need volume to carry meaning, the kind that settled over the table and spread just enough for the others to follow. Because when Ethan Caldwell laughed, people tended to agree, even if they didn't fully understand why. And Clara didn't respond. She didn't explain, didn't defend, didn't insist. She simply placed the receipt gently beside the document, aligning it with quiet precision, and stepped back, her eyes calm, her posture unchanged, as if she had done nothing more than her job, as if she hadn't just said something that would linger far longer than anyone at that table expected. The laughter lingered for a moment, then faded into the soft rhythm of business as usual. But something had shifted, subtle, almost invisible, like a note slightly off in a familiar song. And Ethan Caldwell, still composed, still confident, let his fingers rest on the edge of the document as if the interruption had not mattered, as if nothing had changed, yet his eyes, almost against his will, dropped back to the page. Not fully, not with intention, just a glance, a reflex, the kind of look a man gives when he already expects to confirm his own certainty. And for a second, everything aligned exactly as he thought it would. Numbers clean, columns precise, margins perfect, the kind of order he trusted, the kind of order he built his reputation on. And then his gaze paused, just slightly, the way Clara's had earlier, just long enough for something to feel off, not obvious, not dramatic, just a quiet inconsistency, a repetition that should not have been there, subtle enough that it could pass unnoticed, unless someone was looking for it, or unless someone had the habit of noticing what others dismissed. Ethan straightened in his chair, the movement small but deliberate, his smile still in place, but thinner now, less certain, and one of the men across from him continued speaking, outlining projections, percentages, future returns, but Ethan was no longer fully listening, his attention narrowing, focusing inward, recalculating, verifying, and he reached for the second page, flipping it with controlled precision, his eyes moving faster now, sharper, tracing the numbers back, connecting them, and there it was again, the same figure, placed where it should not be, repeated in a way that distorted the entire structure of the deal, not by much, not enough to alarm the careless, but enough to shift the outcome, enough to quietly redirect millions without immediate detection. And the room had not noticed. The men had not noticed. He had not noticed until she said it. And the realization did not come all at once. It unfolded, piece by piece, each calculation confirming the last, each line reinforcing the same conclusion. And the confidence that had filled the space moments ago began to thin, replaced by something quieter, something heavier, not panic, not yet, but awareness. And Ethan leaned forward slightly, his laughter gone now, replaced by silence, the kind that does not demand attention but changes the atmosphere anyway. One of the men paused mid-sentence, sensing it, though not understanding it, and Ethan did not explain. He did not look up immediately. He simply kept reading, his mind moving faster than his expression revealed, correcting, adjusting, understanding the implications, the scale, the precision of the error, or perhaps the intention behind it. And then, slowly, he set the document down, his fingers resting on it for a moment longer than necessary, as if grounding himself in something real, something certain, before he finally lifted his gaze, not to the men at the table, not to the numbers, but to where Clara had been standing just seconds before, except she was already gone, moving quietly between tables again, carrying another tray, her posture unchanged, her presence blending back into the background as if she had never interrupted anything at all. And Ethan watched her for a moment, longer than he intended, his expression unreadable now, not amused, not dismissive, but thoughtful, measured, as if he was seeing something for the first time that had been there all along, something small, something easy to overlook, something that had just changed everything without raising its voice. Clara did not look back, not once, even as she felt it, the subtle shift in the air behind her, the kind of attention that did not belong to customers waiting for coffee or menus, but something heavier, more deliberate, and she continued moving the way she always did, steady, precise, placing a plate here, refilling a glass there, her expression calm, her pace unbroken, as if nothing unusual had happened, as if she had not just stepped into a world that was never meant to include her. And behind her, Ethan Caldwell remained still for a moment longer than anyone at the table expected, his silence stretching just enough to create discomfort, the kind that made people adjust in their seats, glance at one another, wait for direction, because men like him did not hesitate without reason. And when he finally spoke, his voice was lower, controlled. "Give me a minute," he said, not as a request but as a statement. And the others nodded quickly, papers shifting, conversations pausing, as Ethan gathered the documents into a neat stack, his mind already moving ahead, recalculating the structure of the deal, identifying where the discrepancy originated, how it had been placed, why it had gone unnoticed, and more importantly, who had intended it to remain that way, because this was not a simple mistake, not at this level, not with these numbers. This was design, subtle, careful, meant to pass through unnoticed until it was too late, and yet it had been caught. Not by analysts, not by legal teams, not by anyone trained or paid to find it, but by a waitress carrying water and receipts. And that thought lingered longer than the error itself, because it did not fit, it did not align with the order of things Ethan understood, and he pushed his chair back slightly, standing with measured control, his eyes scanning the room, Not hurried, not searching frantically, but focused, intentional, until they found her again near the far end of the dining room, speaking softly to another table, her posture unchanged, her presence still blending into the background of polished wood and low light. And for a brief moment, he simply watched, observing the way she moved, the way she listened, the way she seemed to notice things without drawing attention to herself. And then he walked, each step deliberate, not rushed, but purposeful enough that a few heads turned as he passed, conversations lowering just slightly, the quiet awareness that followed him wherever he went. And Clara sensed him before she saw him, the faint shift in movement, the pause in the rhythm around her. And when she turned, he was already there, standing just close enough to be heard without raising his voice, his expression composed, but no longer amused, no longer dismissive. "You said that number appears twice," he said. Not a question, not yet, just a statement placed carefully between them, and Clara met his gaze. Without hesitation, her eyes steady, not challenging, not deferential, simply present. "It does," she replied, her tone even, as if she were confirming something obvious, something factual, not something that had just disrupted a multi-million-dollar negotiation. And Ethan studied her for a moment, longer than necessary, as if expecting more, expecting explanation, justification, something to match the significance of what she had pointed out. But she offered nothing else, no elaboration, no attempt to impress, just the quiet certainty of someone who had already said enough. And that, more than anything, unsettled him, because he was used to people explaining themselves, defending their positions, filling silence with words, and she did none of that. She simply stood there, waiting, not for approval, not for reaction, just present in the moment. And after a brief pause, Ethan spoke again, softer this time. "Where did you learn to see something like that?" And for the first time, there was no trace of superiority in his voice, only curiosity, controlled, measured, but real. And Clara's expression did not change, not noticeably, but something in her eyes shifted, something quieter, deeper. "I used to look at things like that every day," she said. And then, without waiting for a response, she turned slightly, reaching for a nearby glass that needed refilling, returning to her work as if the conversation had already ended, leaving Ethan standing there, the question still lingering, the answer incomplete, and the realization settling in that whatever detail he had missed on the page was not the only thing he had failed to see. The glass filled slowly, the stream of water steady and controlled, and Clara's attention remained on the simple task in front of her, as if nothing in the last few minutes had carried any weight beyond routine. But Ethan did not move, not immediately. He stood there with a stillness that did not belong in a place designed for motion, his mind replaying her words, not the content, but the way she had said them, without hesitation, without explanation, without the slightest need to be believed. And that was what unsettled him most, not the error itself, but the certainty behind her observation, because certainty, in his world, was earned, measured, backed by years of experience and layers of verification. And yet she had spoken with it, as if it required none of those things, as if it simply existed. And for a moment, he almost dismissed it again, almost returned to the safety of his assumptions. But the document still rested in his hand, the numbers still did not align, and the deal waiting at his table had not paused. It had only been delayed, and Ethan exhaled quietly, a controlled release, before turning back toward the table, his steps slower now, more deliberate, the confidence still present but no longer effortless. And when he reached his seat, the others looked up immediately, searching his expression for direction, for confirmation, for the signal that everything was still under control. And Ethan sat down, placing the document in front of him with precise alignment, his fingers smoothing the edge once, twice, as if preparing the space before speaking. "We are going to review this section again," he said, his tone calm, but different now, lacking the earlier ease, replaced by something sharper, more focused. And one of the men leaned forward, slightly confused. "Is there a problem?" he asked, and Ethan did not answer right away. He simply turned the page toward him, tapping once on the number Clara had pointed out, the motion small but unmistakable, and the man followed his gaze, his expression shifting slowly as he traced the figures, recalculating, realizing, and the conversation that followed did not rise in volume. It did not become dramatic, but it changed completely. The certainty dissolved, replaced by careful scrutiny, by questions that had not been asked before, by details that now demanded attention, and Ethan remained quiet through most of it, listening, observing, letting the room adjust to a reality that had almost slipped past them unnoticed, and yet his focus drifted again, not to the numbers this time, but to the absence at the edge of his awareness, because Clara was no longer within sight. She had moved on, seamlessly, leaving no trace of the disruption she had caused, and that absence felt louder than her presence had, because it left him with something unfinished, something unresolved. And when the discussion reached a pause, when the revised calculations began to settle into place, Ethan leaned back slightly, his gaze lifting once more across the room, searching, not urgently, but with quiet intention, until he found her again near the service station, speaking softly with another staff member, her posture relaxed, her expression unchanged, as if her world had not intersected with his at all. And for the first time in a very long time, Ethan Caldwell felt something unfamiliar, not doubt, not uncertainty, but recognition, the kind that comes when a piece of the world no longer fits the way you believed it did. And he understood then, not fully, but enough, that the detail she had pointed out was not an accident, not a lucky observation, but a reflection of something deeper, something practiced, something earned. And as the conversation at the table resumed around him, Ethan did not immediately rejoin it, his attention still fixed on the quiet figure across the room, the one person who had said the least and changed the most. The numbers settled into place, corrected, recalculated, contained, and the conversation at Ethan's table slowly rebuilt itself, cautious now, more deliberate, every assumption tested twice before being spoken aloud, and the men around him adjusted quickly, as experienced professionals do, shifting from confidence to precision without acknowledging the change. But Ethan did not fully return with them, not yet. His responses shorter, his attention divided, because something else had taken hold of his focus, something that did not belong on the page in front of him. And when the final figures were agreed upon, when the revised structure no longer carried the hidden flaw, Ethan closed the folder with quiet finality, his fingers resting on it for a brief moment before he pushed it slightly forward, signaling the end of that part of the discussion. "We will continue this tomorrow," he said, his tone calm, leaving no room for objection, and the others nodded, gathering their materials, already shifting their thoughts to next steps, follow-up calls, adjustments. But Ethan remained seated for a second longer, watching as the structure of the meeting dissolved around him, chairs sliding back, jackets adjusted, polite exchanges offered, and then he stood, smoothing the front of his suit with a practiced motion, his posture composed, his expression controlled, but his direction was no longer toward the exit. Not yet. Instead, he turned again, his gaze finding Clara almost instinctively now, as if she had become a fixed point in the room, something his mind returned to without effort. And she was near the register this time, reviewing a small stack of receipts, her head slightly tilted, her eyes moving quickly but not hurried, the same quiet precision he had seen before. And Ethan walked toward her, not with the authority he usually carried, not with the expectation of immediate attention, but with something more measured, something that acknowledged the distance between their worlds. And when he reached the counter, he did not speak right away, giving her the space to finish what she was doing. And Clara, sensing his presence, placed the receipts down neatly, aligning their edges before looking up, her expression neutral, professional, but not distant, simply present. "Is everything resolved?" she asked, her voice calm, as if she were asking about a meal, not a deal worth more than most people would see in a lifetime. And Ethan held her gaze for a moment, longer than necessary, not to assert control, but to understand. "Yes," he said finally, the word simple, but carrying a weight he did not fully express. "Because of you," he added after a brief pause, and Clara did not react the way most people would. There was no visible surprise, no shift in posture, no attempt to accept or deflect the acknowledgement. She simply nodded once, as if confirming a fact that did not need emphasis. "It was already there," she said quietly. "You just needed to see it." And the words landed differently than anything he had heard that day, not as praise, not as humility, but as truth, unembellished. And Ethan exhaled softly, a faint shift in his expression, something almost like a smile, but not quite. Most people here did not. He replied, and Clara's gaze softened just slightly, not with sympathy, but with understanding. Most people were not looking, she said, and for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence between them not uncomfortable, not tense, but reflective, as if something unspoken had already been acknowledged. And Ethan glanced briefly at the receipts she had been reviewing, the small stack of numbers, simple, everyday transactions, and then back at her. You said you used to look at things like that every day, he continued, his voice quieter now, less guarded. What changed? And Clara's eyes dropped for just a second, not in avoidance, but in consideration, as if choosing how much to say. And when she looked back up, her expression remained composed, but there was a depth behind it now, something that hinted at a story she was not offering freely. Some things do not change, she said, her tone even. Only where you look at them from does. And she reached for the receipts again, signaling, gently but clearly, that the conversation had reached its end, not abruptly, not dismissively, just with the same quiet control she had shown from the beginning. And Ethan did not push further, not this time. He simply nodded once, stepping back slightly, the space between them returning, but not the same as before, because now it carried something else, something earned, something he could not quite define yet, but could no longer ignore. The space between them closed again, but this time it was not accidental, not incidental, it was chosen, and Ethan did not return to his table, not immediately. Instead, he remained near the counter, his presence quieter now, less commanding, as if he understood that whatever he was about to say did not belong to the world he usually operated in. And Clara continued her work, stacking receipts, aligning edges, her fingers moving with the same calm precision that had drawn his attention from the beginning. And for a few seconds, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching just enough to feel intentional, not awkward, just measured. And Ethan finally broke it, his voice lower than before. You noticed that in seconds, he said, not as praise, not as disbelief, but as observation, something he was still trying to place, still trying to understand. And Clara did not look up right away. She finished placing the last receipt into the drawer, closing it gently before turning to face him, her expression unchanged. It was not seconds, she replied, her tone even. It was a pattern. And Ethan's brow shifted slightly, not confusion, but interest, the kind that sharpens rather than softens. A pattern, he repeated, and Clara nodded once. Numbers repeat for a reason, she said. Either because someone made a mistake, or because someone expects you not to notice. And the words settled between them, quiet but precise, and Ethan felt the weight of them more than he expected, because in his world, patterns were everything, trends, forecasts, projections, and yet this one had slipped past him, not because it was complex, but because it was subtle, and subtle things were often ignored when confidence was high. And he exhaled slowly, his gaze drifting for a moment toward the table where his colleagues were now finishing their drinks, unaware of the shift that had taken place just a few feet away. And when he looked back at Clara, there was something different in his expression, not authority, not curiosity alone, but recognition. You did not just notice it, he said. You understood it. And Clara's eyes held his for a moment, steady, unshaken. Understanding is just noticing more than once, she replied, and there was no attempt to impress in her voice, no effort to elevate the statement. It was simply how she saw the world, and Ethan let out a faint breath that could have been a quiet laugh, but it carried no amusement, only acknowledgement. You are not just a waitress, he said. The words direct now, no longer framed as questions, and Clara did not react to the statement, not outwardly. She did not deny it, did not confirm it. She simply tilted her head slightly, as if considering whether the label mattered at all. Tonight, I am, she said, her voice calm, grounded, and the answer did not avoid the truth. It reframed it, placing it exactly where she chose it to be, and Ethan studied her for a moment longer, the simplicity of her response revealing more than any explanation could have. And for the first time, he felt something shift within himself, not A loss of control, not uncertainty, but a quiet recalibration, the kind that happens when a belief is replaced, not by force, but by clarity. And he reached into his jacket, pulling out a card, holding it between his fingers for a brief second before placing it gently on the counter between them, not sliding it forward, not pushing it toward her, just leaving it there. "If you ever decide you are not," he said, his tone steady, "call me." And Clara's gaze dropped briefly to the card, then returned to him, her expression unreadable, not dismissive, not intrigued, just aware, and for a moment, it seemed as if she might say something more, something that would extend the conversation beyond this point. But instead, she simply nodded once, the same quiet acknowledgement she had given before, and reached past the card to pick up a clean glass, returning to her work with the same calm focus, as if nothing had been offered. Nothing had changed, and Ethan remained there for a second. Longer, watching, not expecting a response, not waiting for one, but understanding now that whatever decision existed in that moment would not be rushed, would not be influenced, and would not belong to him. The card remained on the counter long after Ethan stepped away, its clean edges catching the soft overhead light, a small, silent object that carried more weight than it appeared to. And Clara did not reach for it. Not immediately. She continued moving through her routine, placing glasses, wiping surfaces, answering quiet requests with the same steady tone she had used all evening. But her awareness lingered, not on the man himself, but on what had been left behind, because offers like that did not belong to her world, not anymore. And yet they were not unfamiliar either, not entirely. And across the room, Ethan paused near the entrance, his hand resting briefly on the back of a chair as he glanced once more toward the counter, not expecting anything, not waiting, just confirming something to himself before he moved on. And then he left, the door closing softly behind him, the outside noise slipping in for a moment before settling back into the controlled quiet of the restaurant. And the space he left behind did not feel empty. It felt altered, as if something subtle had shifted and had not yet settled into place. And Clara exhaled quietly, a breath she had not realized she had been holding, before finally stepping toward the counter, her fingers brushing the surface near the card, not picking it up, just acknowledging its presence. And for a moment, she looked at it, really looked at it, the name printed in clean, precise lettering, the kind of card that opened doors without explanation, the kind that assumed access, assumed response. And her expression did not change, but something behind it moved, something quieter, deeper, the kind of memory that does not announce itself but arrives fully formed. And she turned away, reaching for a stack of menus instead, placing them neatly in order, aligning corners, restoring structure to the small space she controlled, because structure was simple here, predictable. And for the next hour, she did not return to the counter, she did not look at the card again. She worked, steadily, efficiently, the rhythm of the restaurant carrying her forward, orders coming in, plates going out, conversations blending into background noise, and gradually, the moment began to fade, not disappear, but settle into something less immediate, something that could be set aside, until the shift slowed, until the final tables cleared, until the lights dimmed just slightly, signaling the end of the night, and the restaurant grew quieter, emptier. The echo of earlier conversations replaced by the soft sounds of cleanup, and Clara returned to the counter then, her steps unhurried, her movements deliberate, and the card was still there, exactly where he had left it, untouched, unchanged, waiting without expectation, and she stood in front of it for a moment, her gaze steady, not conflicted, not rushed, just present, as if weighing something that could not be measured in numbers or outcomes. And slowly, she reached out, not quickly, not impulsively, but with intention, her fingers lifting the card from the surface, turning it once in her hand, feeling its weight, its texture, the quiet promise it represented. And she did not smile, she did not frown, she simply looked at it, understanding exactly what it offered, and exactly what it could cost. And after a second, she slipped it into the pocket of her apron, not as acceptance, not as rejection, but as acknowledgement. And then she turned away, picking up a cloth, beginning to wipe down the counter with the same calm precision she had shown all night, as if nothing had changed, even though something had. Morning arrived quietly, without ceremony. The city outside already in motion long before the restaurant lights flickered back on, and Clara stood near the service station tying the strings of her apron with the same calm precision she brought to everything, her movements unhurried, her expression composed, as if the night before had settled into something distant, something contained, but the card was still there, not in her hand, not on the counter, but in the pocket of her coat hanging in the staff room, present even when unseen. And as the first customers filtered in, the rhythm began again. Coffee poured, orders taken, conversations overlapping in soft layers of routine, and for a while, nothing felt different, nothing demanded attention beyond the next task, until the door opened again, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a subtle shift that carried across the room. The kind of presence that did not need introduction, and Ethan Caldwell stepped inside, his posture the same, his expression controlled, but his pace slower than before, as if this was not a place he usually returned to, not for business, not for habit, and Clara noticed him immediately, not because he stood out, but because she had already learned how to notice what others overlooked, and their eyes met for a brief second across the room. No surprise, no reaction, just recognition, and she returned to her table, finishing the order in front of her before moving again, because that was her world, one task at a time, and Ethan did not take his previous seat. He chose a table by the window this time, alone, the light catching the edge of his watch as he sat down, not opening a laptop, not pulling out documents, just sitting, observing, and when Clara approached, her posture remained professional, her tone even. "Good morning," she said, placing a glass of water in front of him, and Ethan looked up, holding her gaze for a moment before responding, "Good morning." The words simple, but without the distance they carried the day before, and there was a pause, not awkward, not forced, just enough to acknowledge that this was not the same interaction as before. "I did not expect to see you again," Clara said, her voice calm, not questioning, just stating, and Ethan gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. "Neither did I," he replied, and the honesty in it carried more weight than any explanation, and Clara tilted her head slightly, as if considering that, before asking, "Coffee?" And he allowed a faint smile, small, controlled. "Yes," he said, black, and as she turned to leave, his voice followed, not raised, but steady. "Did you look at it?" And Clara paused, just for a fraction of a second, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for the moment to register, and she turned back slightly, her expression unchanged. "I did," she said, and Ethan leaned back just a little, not relaxing, but settling into the conversation, and he asked, the word quiet, open, and Clara met his gaze again, steady, composed. "It is just a card," she replied, and there was no dismissal in her voice, no challenge, just clarity, and Ethan's expression shifted slightly, not in disagreement, but in understanding, as if he had expected that answer, as if he had come back not to persuade, but to see what she would do with the choice, and Clara turned away then, moving toward the coffee station, leaving him with nothing more than that simple statement. And for the first time, Ethan did not try to control what came next. He simply watched, waiting, not for her decision, but for what she would reveal, without saying anything at all. The coffee steamed gently as Clara placed it in front of him, the surface still, undisturbed, and Ethan watched it for a moment before looking up again, not at the cup, but at her, as if the answer he was waiting for had nothing to do with what he had ordered, and Clara did not step away this time, not immediately. She remained there for a second longer than necessary, her hand resting lightly against the edge of the table, her posture composed, her presence quiet but deliberate, and the space between them felt different now, not divided by roles, not defined by expectation, just open, and Ethan finally spoke, his voice lower than before, stripped of the ease he once carried so effortlessly. "It is not just a card," he said, not correcting her, but offering something else, something closer to what he meant, and Clara's eyes did not shift. She met his gaze steadily. "It is an opportunity," he continued, and the word lingered, carrying the weight of everything it implied, everything it promised, and Clara tilted her head slightly, considering, not the offer, but the way he had framed it, and then she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It always is, she replied, her tone calm, as if the concept itself was not new, not surprising, just familiar, and Ethan leaned forward just slightly, not pressing, but engaged now. Then why does it not feel like one to you? He asked, and the question was not sharp, not challenging. It was quiet, almost careful, as if he understood that the answer mattered more than the offer itself. And Clara's gaze dropped briefly to the coffee, the thin layer of steam rising and fading, before returning to him. Because opportunities usually come with direction, she said, her voice steady. This one comes with expectation, and the distinction settled between them, subtle but clear. And Ethan did not respond right away. He considered it, the difference between the two, the way he had always presented one as the other. And for the first time, he did not argue. He did not reshape the narrative to fit his understanding. He simply listened, and Clara continued, not explaining, not justifying, just stating what was already there. You already know what you would want me to do, she said, and Ethan's expression shifted slightly, not defensive, not surprised, just aware. And she held his gaze, not challenging him, just allowing the truth to sit where it belonged. And I have not decided if that is where I belong, she finished, and there was no hesitation in her voice, no uncertainty, just clarity. And Ethan exhaled slowly, a quiet release that carried something unfamiliar, not frustration, not control, but acceptance, the kind that does not come from agreement, but from understanding. And he leaned back again, his posture easing, not in defeat, but in recognition. And for a moment, neither of them spoke, the silence returning, but this time, it was not filled with unspoken tension. It was filled with something else, something settled. And after a few seconds, Ethan reached for the coffee, lifting it, taking a small sip, not because he needed it, but because the moment had reached its natural end. And when he set the cup down, he looked at her again, not as a waitress, not as an answer to a problem, but as something he had not expected to find. If you ever decide, he began, then paused, the sentence incomplete, and Clara watched him, waiting, not for the offer, but for the choice behind it, and Ethan gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile. It will still be your decision, he finished, and Clara nodded once, the same quiet acknowledgement she had given from the beginning, not accepting, not rejecting, just recognizing the shift. And she stepped back then, returning to her work, her movements steady, unchanged, as if nothing in her world had been altered. And Ethan remained seated for a moment longer, watching the way she moved, the way she existed within a space that did not define her. And then he stood, placing a few bills on the table, not excessive, not performative, just enough. And he walked toward the door, his steps calm, unhurried. And as he reached it, he paused for a brief second, not turning back, not looking again, just standing there, as if marking the moment without needing to see it, before stepping outside into the noise of the city, leaving behind the quiet space where something small, something almost invisible, had changed the way he would see everything after. And inside, Clara continued her work, the rhythm unchanged, the world moving forward exactly as it had before, except now, there was one more detail she had chosen not to miss, and one more person who finally understood that the smallest things were often the ones that mattered most.